In October of 2000, both Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Nordman were shot to death, and their bodies were discovered in an Indianapolis dumpster. Their roommates, Sarah Pender, who was 21 at the time of the shootings, and her then-boyfriend Richard Hall, were ultimately both found guilty of their murders. 6 years after Pender was subsequently sentenced to 110 years in prison, she mounted a dramatic escape from the Rockville Correctional Facility in Indiana. Pender, who was previously dubbed the female Charles Manson by the prosecutor on her case, dyed her hair, changed her appearance, and evaded law enforcement for over 130 days. The new docuseries, Girl on the Run, The Hunt for America's Most Wanted Woman, examines the captivating story of the chase and Pender's life after. Tom Pearson, the show's executive producer, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is Tom Pearson, one of the executive producers of Girl on the Run, The Hunt for America's Most Wanted Woman. Tom, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Your new docuseries tells the story of Sarah Pender, who at only 23 years old was sentenced to 110 years in prison for the murders of two of her roommates. She maintained she did not shoot them to death. She wasn't the mastermind behind their murders, but instead the co-defendant and her ex-boyfriend Richard Hull was responsible. 6 years after she was convicted for the double murder, she escaped prison with the help of a prison guard, as well as a network of former inmates who were her friends who were then outside. The story made national headlines. She was featured on America's Most Wanted, and she was effectively on the lam for well over 100 days. I mean, this is a story that is straight out of a movie. But to start off the conversation, what drew you to it?
So my colleagues, Stuart and Max, actually first met Sarah Pender back in 2013. They were making a documentary for a UK channel with Sir Trevor MacDonald, and Sarah had just finished spending 5 years in isolation. And they spoke with her, and they were struck both by her and by her story. And so we kept in touch over the next few years. And then we got to the point where we were in a position where we could tell her story.
I'm wondering how something like this exactly gets made, because you got a lot of people on board for conversations that were all featured in the story in one way or another. Sarah herself sat down for extensive interviews. You talked to her parents, her ex-boyfriend, and the co-defendant, a former inmate who was her friend on the outside who helped her escape after she left, the prosecutor, the U.S. Marshal who was hunting her down. I mean, how did this all come together?
So we've got a really good team that's been making the series, and they've been working to get access to agree interviews with people for a number of years, actually. And like all access processes, it's a case of communication, being clear about what your intent is, what you're looking to make, and making sure that people understand that we're here to tell their story as they experienced it. You know, we don't have a host, we don't have an agenda. It's just an opportunity for people to set out their experiences as they lived them. And of course, there are different versions of events from different people connected with this story. But that's how they experienced it.
To that point, because there were drastic different descriptions of Sarah Pender based on who exactly you spoke to. I mean, this really impacted everyone. So what was exactly your intent? And did any conversation change the trajectory of this series? Because it was really interesting to hear Sarah Pender's perspective, her proclaiming her innocence, her talking about her time on the run, her time 5 years in solitary confinement. I mean, one of the conversations, though, that moved me the most was the U.S. Marshal who was hunting her down. And he talked about the toll this took on his life. He said he lost his marriage, he lost his kids over this manhunt and his involvement in trying to track her down. What was that conversation for you, if there was one that changed the trajectory of this?
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. So very often with law enforcement officials, the interviews are based on the process, the sort of the professional steps that they've taken in the investigation that they've been involved in. And I think what was unique about Ryan is, for him, this hunt for Sarah became existential. He speaks very openly about the fact that very often a prisoner escapes, you get them in 24, 48 hours. And when he got notified he was out there to look for Sarah, he didn't think anything of it. He thought it was another day in the office. He had no idea about how big a hunt it would become. and the huge toll it would take on his personal life. And I think what's unique about Ryan is he speaks about not just what he's doing in terms of chasing Sarah down, but also how that impacted upon his life at home.
And I think you could really tell, it really came across, at least to me as a viewer, that he took this personally. This wasn't just some 9 to 5 job that he clocked out. He could turn this off. I mean, this really, it seemed to consume him. But he described Sarah as one way, as someone who could easily manipulate others around her, someone who could use people for favors and then move on. Sarah was described by the prosecutor at the time as the female Charles Manson. That changed, obviously, and we can get into that later. She was also described as someone who was considerate. Everyone, whether they were tracking Sarah down or they were her friend, said how smart she was. I mean, she went to Purdue University for a time. She was studying a science-related major there. How would you describe Sarah Pender? What was she like to you? Did you get the sense when you were talking to her, oh, this is someone who can manipulate people? Did you get the sense that her father said she was kind and compassionate and caring and considerate? What was that for you?
So she is undoubtedly incredibly intelligent. She's very articulate. She is able to give an account of her life in extraordinary detail, which is actually quite unique, I would say, amongst people that we've filmed with. And in terms as to whether she's manipulative or charming, there are two very different views. You know, there's a fence and people fall one side or the other. There are those that love and care for her who would describe her as charming, and there are those that have been involved in her prosecution and law enforcement who would describe her as manipulative. So there are completely different views as to who she is. But she has had some extraordinary labels put on her by the media, by the prosecutor. And I think part of the reason that she wanted to do this, it was an opportunity to actually speak at length about her experiences and move beyond the more concise news reports and talk about what her life was and how it came to be that she ended up where she did.
This story is just incredible, that someone who escaped prison, she was on the run for close to 140 days. She was on the U.S. Marshal's 15 most wanted fugitives list. And as you said, she felt that there were misconceptions about her in the media, in the news. Do you think there were misconceptions of her? I mean, what is the biggest one there?
So I think, and a point that she makes very well herself, is that there's a common issue that women face, that they're called manipulative and that they are blamed for the failings of the men around them. And I think that was an argument she put forward very strongly in the interview, is that actually, rather than the men around her taking responsibility for what they did, and I'm specifically talking now actually about the prison guards that she worked with on her escape, they put it on her and said that she had manipulated them into doing, well, breaking the law, helping her get out of prison.
And one of them, I think, got $15,000 or something to help with her escape. So it's not like she exactly had a gun to his head to do that. But I'm curious, I cover politics a lot of the time. That's one half of my job. And so I'm used to talking to people who have different points of views, right? Republicans, Democrats, everyone in between. I'm curious, from your perspective, you're talking to one person who said, I did not commit this crime. This was someone else was responsible. Then you sit down and you actually talk to the other co-defendant, Richard Hull, and he has a completely different story. He completely blames Sarah. What is that like? And as the executive producer, I mean, how do you approach those conversations when there's a completely different view of what happened at a certain time?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, Richard is also very articulate, and from our experience with him, also very intelligent. He gives his own very clear and compelling account of events, which differs completely from that of Sarah. I think our job really is to allow the interviewees to tell their story clearly and fairly, so that they can put their case forwards and then let the audience decide. But I think what was unique about this actually is, even amongst the team here, because of course, this is what we live and breathe for many months when we're making a series. This is what our waking life is all about. And actually, amongst the team working on it, there was a very different, there was a great spread of opinion as to who was telling the truth, what might have happened. And of course, the truth is, only Richard and Sarah know what happened that night. Nobody else does. And everybody else, I think, has their own instinct as to what the truth of it is. but it differs hugely.
Someone who I think had a change of heart in what the truth was Larry Sells. He was the prosecutor on the case. Someone who really, I think, at one point in the series said Sarah was demonic or something to that effect. Definitely called her the female version of Charles Manson. He changed his mind based on evidence that he saw. What was that conversation like when you were talking with him about that change of heart? Because for on just a human level, it's very hard to admit when you're wrong. And then when you're admitting when you're wrong, when you effectively put someone in jail, I mean, I just can't even imagine. What was that like for you?
I mean, he's had an extraordinary journey that he goes on. He's very honest about what he feels were the mistakes he made. And you can see that he was conflicted, exactly as you say, on a personal level, because he had to say, I got it wrong. But also, I'm sure he had to weigh out the fact that by saying he got it wrong, there was an implicit criticism about the whole system with which he was working within. He was a very seasoned and experienced prosecutor. And I'm sure, well, I know that he had to weigh up in himself, not just about admitting he was wrong, but questioning the whole machine, the whole system that he was part of before coming out in the open. And now he is a vocal advocate for justice not having been done.
And there was a development in this case really recently. At the beginning of this year, Sarah's petition for early release was denied. She's 46 years old now. That means the earliest she can get out will be in 2054. She'll be in her mid 70s. You've spent time with her personally. You've devoted so many years on this series, on her story. What was that like for you personally, the toll of that type of news?
Well, it was I think when we were filming it, her very experienced legal team were confident. Of course, nobody knows the outcome of any judicial process, but they were confident and they felt that it was going to go their way. So they were absolutely shocked when it didn't. And ultimately, we looked to them for their experience as to how it was likely to end. So we were all as surprised as they were that it didn't go the way that they thought it would.
I think from my position here covering crime in general, you learn a lot about the injustices in the justice system. Covering this and diving into Sarah's story, did you learn anything new about the justice system that you didn't know before? Did your mind change at all about anything?
I think, whenever you make a documentary series like this, you want to tell the story of the people that it's about, but you also want to use that as an opportunity to look at bigger questions, bigger picture. And I think what really struck all of us working on this is it's an impossible question. What is justice? What is fair justice? At the heart of this, two young people lost their lives, but as a consequence of that, two other people are going to spend very likely the rest of their life in prison. Their families, the families of the victims have lost the people that they love. The families of Sarah and Richard are not going to see their children living a free life again. And I think it's a really challenging question to ask, and I hope one that the series provokes people to consider themselves is, what is fair justice? How do you deal with these extraordinary extreme events and come up with a sort of I suppose, a fair conclusion?
Those were questions I certainly was confronted with and were swirling in my head as I was watching it. But this isn't your first series dealing with a crime, but how is this different than anything else you've ever made?
Well, I think it's the chase. I mean, the spine of the series is the chase, and it is straight out of Hollywood. You have a US Marshal whose whole purpose, who every moment of their life is existentially predicated on catching Sarah Pender. And of course, for Sarah, her freedom, the thing that she has literally knowingly risked her life to get, is as equally determined to get away as he is to catch her. And it's that tense cat and mouse experience that they were both living from completely different experiences. And as documentary makers, you always want to tell compelling stories from both sides. And this really delivers on that, because to be inside these completely extraordinary stories, I mean, if it was written as a drama, it would sound made up. It's so out there. And they're both very able to tell their story.
Very articulately. I mean, sometimes I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, and they were able to really nail down exactly what happened. I mean, that U.S. Marshal, Ryan Harmon, he really seemed like someone straight out of Central Casting. He was just so hell-bent on finding Sarah, and it was really fascinating to see their perspectives as you had in your series, the days ticking on in the chase, how long she was on the lam, and then you saw their perspectives in real time. But Girl on the Run is out now. Where can people find it?
So it's on Hulu and Disney Plus.
Tom Pearson, thank you so much for the time today. A big congrats to you on the series. It was so compelling. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. Take care.